Hey folks, my name's Joe Garland. I write under Joseph P. Garland for my literary stuff and J.P. Garland for my more romantic stuff, and Elizabeth Holland, whose books I enjoy quite a bit. And this one I happen to have in paper, but I like how she writes, and she's done a Christmas book set in the where she has the bookshop of memories, and she asked whether people had Christmas books they wanted to mention and comment upon. I do. She sent some questions around, and while I think she wanted us to write them, I figured being lazy, would respond in a video. And let me just tell you a little bit of background, because some of the questions she has is, how is Christmas where you are, where you grew up? And I grew up in New York, and I'm in New York now. And the story I have is set in Manhattan, but it's a little bit unusual. So it has elements of a New York Christmas for tourists more than for what we did when we were growing up in the suburbs. And by that, I mean, the story is basically, which is called a fairy tale of New York, which is actually based upon that song, and that song does appear in the book. So not that, it's about 11,000 words. It involves a British tourist, a man from Brighton, who's just been dumped by his girlfriend. His parents are coming to New York for the holiday, and he decides to tag along. Setup is, and it's in his voice, and after when they arrive, get in from Heathrow, they visit the Rockefeller Center Christmas tree, which people do, even New Yorkers do that. And they stop for lunch at an Irishy pub off of 6th Avenue in Midtown, which is populated by a mix of people who work in the area and people who are tourists, such as the main character. And there he sets his eyes upon an Irish woman from Dublin who works as a waitress. And that's the basic setup here. There's some magic between the two, and it is a romance, so they will ultimately get together at the end. Spoiler there. But what I try to do is have two people from different cultures in a sense, one living in New York and the other visiting New York, one Irish, one English, and connecting with one another. And I think the best way I could describe that getting together is, I'm going to read a couple of excerpts. The first one is brief. She asks him to join her to go skating at the Woolman Rink, which is in the southern part of Central Park. And she asks if he can skate, and he says, "I come from Brighton. Of course, I don't know how to skate." So they go there anyway. They rent skates. They make fools of themselves on the ice, and then they sit down. This is their first real date, while she has time off between the lunch service and the dinner service at her restaurant. And this little section goes, and again, they've just rented skates. After retrieving our shoes, we bought 2 hot chocolates from a concession near the rink and sat leaning against one another on a bench overlooking it, trying to keep warm. She said she had to be back at work in half an hour, and suddenly her hand caressed my thigh. I think she surprised herself by what her hand did, and she started to pull it away. I surprised myself by reaching and holding it there, and more by turning to her and placing a light kiss on her chocolate-covered lips. It was just a moment, but it took my breath away. Suddenly, her free hand had lifted from my thigh and was pulling my head to hers and my mouth to hers. Hers was wet and open and chocolatey when it reached mine, and I opened my lips to receive hers. I was lost on her tongue, struggling to maintain my breath. And she had to be back at work in half an hour. And anyway, I had a hotel room that I shared with my parents. I peeked and saw her eyes were closed as we kissed. She released her hand and my head moved back. That is early on in the story, and I think that gives a sense of what my little story is about. That happens Christmas time in 2016. They separate because he's a tourist. He's there. He is in his parents' hotel. They have a wonderful couple of hours when his parents leave them alone in the hotel room, and that's it. He's gone back to England. She's still in in New York. It does have a scene in there for Christmas Day itself, which I like. In New York City, there are a number of places in New York City that are largely inhabited by Irish Americans or people who are from Ireland who are working in the US. And one of those is in the northern Bronx. It's called Woodlawn. And so she arranges for the parents and the main character to take the subway up to Woodlawn. So there's the experience of being on a subway in New York City on Christmas Day, which is it's a special time. People are there, all walks of life, carrying their bags of presents and food and whatnot. She goes to a closed restaurant in Woodlawn with other people who work at restaurants in front of house and back of house, people of various ethnicities, not Irish, Polish, American, Jewish, whatever. And they have a great time there, but they have to leave a few days after Christmas, and they leave. And then the story resumes at Christmas time, 2018, in Brighton at his parents' place. He's a student. He's at university in Newcastle. He's an engineering student, and he plans on living in Newcastle after he graduates. And he has graduated with 2018, and he's visiting his folks. And he comes in, and there she is. Hadn't spoken to him in 2 years. She's sitting in the living room, and they get together briefly, but he gets pissed at her and she leaves. And somehow they end up together back at her aunts and uncles' places in Kensington, and they get together, and both realize how much they miss the other. And that although this is a love at first sight story, it's more important. And so the story concludes in 2019 up in Newcastle, a little suburb of Newcastle, and where all of the parents show up. And there's a baby daughter, Maeve, and that's how the story ends. So that's kind of a brief blurb. It's my book, A Fairy Tale of New York, and you may wonder what that reference is to, but it is to the song. And it is her reaction to the song and her bringing back memories of her time in New York when she was so happy in that brief period when they were together. So that's the book. It's available on Kindle, Kindle Unlimited, only on Kindle. And that's that part of this. Now, one thing Elizabeth wanted was to get a sense of what other people do for Christmas and how things go historically and otherwise. Basically, in New York City suburbs, Catholic, we went to Mass on Christmas morning. We were allowed to open our presents when we got up. We didn't have to wait for our parents to get up. And so my brother and I in particular would get up really early and race down, rip up the wrapping paper, and some of the presents would actually still be working by the time my parents came down a bit later. Went to Mass, and then we had a Christmas, usually in Brooklyn, where my parents are from, but particularly my mother's family my grandmother had a place out in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, which is right by the Verrazano Bridge. And we would drive out there, and that's where we would spend Christmas Day, or have Christmas dinner. So that's how we did things then. And now it's a smaller group of people. And with COVID, we haven't gone anywhere for Christmas, but traditionally we've gone to my sister's house up in Westchester, and it's been a family thing, kids running around and things like that. Looking at the other questions that Elizabeth asked. Well, she asked whether you'd spend Christmas Day with any of the characters in the story. And I like the characters. They're a little confused at the beginning. But at the end of the process, they all get together. They're very nice people. As I say, a little confused. He's just been dumped when the story begins. She's kind of getting over being left nearly at the altar in Ireland, and actually coming to New York in part to get over that. But neither of them find that history to be overwhelming. And it's more, as I say, a question of love at first sight, and they get together. So I'd be happy to be sitting in the apartment. He's Church of England and she's Catholic, but somehow he goes to Mass on Christmas and he goes to Mass on Easter. But he still hasn't been converted to it. So that would be that. Some basic questions about 2021, 2022, not in the Christmas context. In 2021, I wrote, finished a couple of books. You can find them on Kindle, on Amazon. I have a page, germanyhouse.com, and my books are there, both romances and literary fiction. I've just finished another contemporary book set in Westchester County, New York, and in the Upper West Side of Manhattan, which I'm querying, but it looks like no one's going to take an interest, so I'll likely self-publish that in January or so. And that is a book called I Am Alex Locus. And for 2022, my hope is to just finish up. I have a bunch of works in progress that I'm trying to piece together, whether they'll get to novel length or just novella. I'm not sure, but I've been in a loop of writing stories set in the 1870s, 1880s New York City, which is the beginning of the Gilded Age, and kind of a contrast between the wealthy people and not the poor of the poor, but of the people who work for them. And those are my first two historicals are set back in that period. Now, let's see, real Christmas tree or false Christmas tree. Growing up, we always had a real tree. And when we lived in the city, we had a real tree. You'd go down to the street. You got into you know, for us, it would be Columbus Avenue. You see this in the movie When Harry Met Sally. You buy a tree, you bring it home, you put it up. The last few years, we had some issues with bugs, and then we decided to get an artificial tree, which we're perfectly content with at this point, after all those years of having a real tree, a natural tree, I guess is what you'd call it. Tinsel or no tinsel, we call it garland over here in some respects, as well as tinsel. When I was a kid, we always used it, not so much since I've been growing up. No mince pies for me. We don't sit around watching Christmas films particularly. You know, there's some big ones. It Happened One Night. I'm not a big fan of It Happened One Night, just as I'm not a big fan of the song of Fairytale of New York. Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, when I was a kid, we'd open presents on Christmas morning as soon as we got up. Now that I've gotten older, it's just us and my in-laws. We sometimes would open a present on Christmas Eve and then open the rest of the presents on Christmas Day. And I think that's it for what I have to say. So I'm going to show you what the cover looks like of the book. Bear with me for just a second. Well, I can't find it. I can't find the cover. There it is. This is not. That's the wrong cover. Wrong cover. This is what the cover of the book looks like. There we have it. And that's about it. A Fairytale of New York. If you're not reading Elizabeth's books, you should. She's a really great author, a variety of things. You could really feel yourself sitting in that bookshop that she had in two of the books. And without further ado, that's Joe Garland again. And so thank you for watching.